At business dinners in Ning City, whenever influential figures in the circle are discussed, Cleo Shu, the youngest daughter of the Shu family, is inevitably mentioned. First, she's stunningly beautiful yet ruthless. Second, as a fallen heiress, she's surrounded by endless scandals. She enjoys immense popularity in Ning City, with suitors lining up one after another. Public opinion labels her as the epitome of a refined egoist, accusing her of toying with relationships and leveraging her beauty to exploit admirers like harvesting, a metaphor for taking advantage of others. There's been a lot of gossip, but Cleo Shu couldn't care less. All she cares about is how many contracts the company signs and how much profit they make this quarter. She had just wrapped up 2 major projects recently and was finally ready to take a breather when she got a call from a business associate. They mentioned a deep-pocketed client was looking for a logistics company to collaborate with and asked if she wanted to attend the dinner meeting. Cleo Shu is famously a workaholic. She hung up the phone and rushed to the restaurant, but as soon as she entered the private dining room, before she could even greet anyone, she noticed an abrupt, eerie silence fall over the room. For a moment, she thought she might have walked into the wrong room. But when she looked up and saw who was sitting at the head of the table, she understood why everyone had suddenly gone quiet. After 5 or 6 years apart, she never expected to run into Miles' Song again. Everyone at the table turned to look at her in unison. The circle was too small. Most of those present knew at least a fragment of her past with Miles' Song, and their expressions were quite telling. Her colleague, however, wasn't from Ning City and was unaware of the history. Completely oblivious to the awkward tension, they began introducing Cleo Shu. Mr. Song. This is. Cleo Shu's gaze met Miles' Song's, and in that instant, his eyes darkened like a nighttime pond, deep and unfathomable. They hadn't seen each other for many years, and Miles' Song remained as inscrutable as ever when it came to his moods, except that the fingertips of his right hand were absently rubbing against his cufflinks, a perfectly ordinary gesture, but Cleo Shu knew him inside out. She recognized it as the unconscious habit he displayed only when displeased or hesitant. She immediately smiled, lips closed, polite and warm. It was a practiced smile, one so amiable that even Emirates flight attendants might not manage it when facing their business-class gold card passengers. She let out a soft HMPH and said, "I heard a big client had come to Ning City. I wondered who it could be. Turns out it's President Song, an old acquaintance, I suppose." As she spoke, she had already taken a seat on her own, neither too close nor too far from Miles' Song. For some reason, out of the corner of her eye, she sensed Miles' Song furrow his brows ever so slightly. Everyone present was sharp as a tack. The moment Cleo Shu finished speaking, someone stepped in to smooth things over, showering Miles' Song with a stream of flattery. His business had been expanding rapidly in recent years, and everyone was eager to forge some kind of connection with him. So no one dared to provoke Miles' Song, fearing the conversation would steer toward Cleo Shu. After all, everyone knew that years ago, Miss Shu and President Song were deeply in love, inseparable, and the perfect match. It was said that Miles' Song used to dote on Cleo Shu endlessly. If she told him to go east, he wouldn't dare go west. If she pointed at the moon, he'd rush to buy her a star. As for how they ended up in a complete estrangement, the outside world had plenty of rumors. Mostly based on Cleo Shu's carefree, playgirl lifestyle. The most widely accepted version is that Cleo Shu was used to dumping people. Once the novelty wore off and things got boring, she kicked President Song to the curb. It ended so badly that President Song's love turned to hatred, even going so far as to suppress the Shu family before leaving town, vowing never to return to Ning City, the place of his heartbreak. Cleo Shu took a few sips of tea and suddenly found the whole situation rather ironic. She abruptly stood up and grabbed the wine jug from the table. Her stomach was empty, yet she smiled at Miles' Song and said, "Mr. Song, you've come from afar, let me share a drink with you." Before Miles' Song could respond with a yes or no, she downed the glass in one go. The fiery liquid burned its way down her throat. Washing away all the old memories in her mind, she took another drink as if it were water and said, "I heard you've been looking for partners lately. If the opportunity arises, perhaps we could collaborate in the future." Miles' Song, a man of few words, fixed her with a heavy gaze and reminded her, You used to pass out after just one drink. Cleo Shu, accustomed to being the service provider, now took her cautious demeanor to the extreme, her face adorned with an ingratiating smile that Miles Song found downright grating. Her words carried a double meaning, delivered in a playful tone. You said it yourself, that was back then. Times change. When you're young and trying to please boys, of course you pretend to be a lightweight, a bystander chimed in, adding fuel to the fire. Miss Shu has a legendary tolerance, she never gets drunk. Cleo Shu responded with cheerful laughter, while Miles Song, true to his reticent nature, said nothing more and simply downed his drink in one go. By the end of the drinking session, most of the table was drunk, yet Cleo Shu remained steadfast among them. The smile on her face never faltered for a second. As firmly fixed as her waterproof makeup, making it impossible to tell she was once the domineering young miss of yesteryear. The night wind was strong, and as late spring edged into early summer, Ning City showed signs of warming. Miles Song walked behind Cleo Shu and suddenly spoke up. Let me take you home. Cleo Shu paused mid-step, turning to face him in the night breeze, yet subtly took another step to widen the distance between herself and Miles Song. Wouldn't that be inappropriate, Mr. Song? A man and a woman alone in the dead of night. If word got out, it might upset Mrs. Song. Miles Song frowned slightly and retorted, there is no Mrs. Song. Cleo Shu showed no surprise, as if she had just heard an insignificant piece of news. She suddenly chuckled lightly. You probably haven't been back to Ning City for years and might not know that sending me home implies spending the night together. It would be even better if we could discuss some business in the middle of the night. Does President Song also wish to offer himself as a companion for the night? Miles Song's expression darkened instantly. Cleo Shu, are you acting recklessly like this now? The designated driver Cleo Shu called arrived, but she wasn't in a hurry to get in the car. Her smile didn't fade as she spoke, lowering her own stance to the extreme. This isn't recklessness, just a matter of mutual consent. If President Song can't stand such behavior, you can simply treat me as a joke. With that, she opened the door to get in, but Miles Song immediately raised his hand and grabbed her wrist. His action was instinctive. In the past, whenever he had argued with Cleo Shu and stopped her from leaving, this was how he had held her back. When his well-defined fingers touched the skin of Cleo Shu's wrist, both of them froze for a moment. But Miles Song didn't let go. Director Song, do you really want to spend the night with me? Well, I wouldn't be at a loss then, Miles Song said coldly. We need to talk. Cleo Shu looked at him and asked slowly, what is there to talk about? President Song, are you planning to hand over that collaboration to me? There's no difference between discussing it tonight or tomorrow. It's not about that. Cleo Shu exerted a bit of force to pull her hand away and said softly, then what else is there for us to discuss, unless you still want to meddle in my affairs? She smiled and said, as for the collaboration, we can talk about it during work hours if there's time. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave now. With that, she got into the car. No longer looking at the expression on Miles Song's face, the car gradually drove away, and Miles Song's figure became increasingly indistinct in the rearview mirror. The alcohol in Cleo Shu's stomach began to churn only now, making the healed scar on her hand ache faintly. Cleo Shu sometimes felt that time and the truthfulness of rumors were always inversely proportional. Over time, the stories from back then have become increasingly distorted, painting her as a heartless and unfaithful villain. In the end, only the parties involved occasionally recall the past, drinking cup after cup late into the night. Honing the ability to remain sober even after 1,000 drinks, the year Cleo Shu met Miles Song, she was still a student. One day, her family suddenly told her they had found her a fiancé. Young Cleo Shu was playful and carefree. As a child, her dream was to go to Antarctica to save penguins. Upon hearing this news, she immediately protested. What era is this? Still practicing blind marriages? I don't care if he's round or flat, I'm running away from home. Her father, exasperated by his wayward daughter, said, Miles has a very good temper and is a perfect match for you. Cleo Shu was about to lose her temper when her father added leisurely, besides, he's had a hard life, his mother passed away early, and the Song family is such a complicated place, you could really help him. Truth be told, Mr. Shu had taken a liking to Miles' Song for his maturity at such a young age and the fact that he was still unestablished, making him easier to manage and less likely to bully his daughter. But to persuade Cleo Shu, he framed it as an act of kindness. Cleo, always soft-hearted and passionate, instantly conjured up a tragic backstory for the poor young master in her mind. Finally, she relented. Fine. I'll reluctantly agree to meet him. That was the beginning of their story. Miles' Song was blessed with striking good looks, which greatly pleased Miss Shu, having never been in a relationship before. Miss Shu lifted her chin with a haughty yet endearing air and said to Miles' Song, "You'd better think carefully, I'm not easy to please." Miles' Song simply smiled, reached out to gently touch the top of her head as if smoothing the fur of a Maine Coon, and replied, "Not too bad, this is just fine." And so, they began their romance. They say Cleo Shu is hard to please, but it's just that she's a few years younger than Miles' Song and spoiled by her family, often coming up with whimsical ideas. Miles' Song indulges her every whim. If she wails about wanting to climb a snow-capped mountain, he cancels work to accompany her. Breathless, the two of them reach the summit hand in hand. In the howling wind and snow, Cleo Shu tackles Miles' Song. Her eyes are bright, her nose red from the cold, and in a moment of impulse, she kisses him. Miles' Song is stunned for a moment, then cups her wind-chilled face in his hands, tracing the contours of her lips with his own. "We once skydived together from 10,000 meters high and shared a smile while diving among the coral reefs of the Red Sea." Cleo Shu has an endless supply of fiery energy, openly adoring whoever she likes and never hesitates to express her love. The biggest gossip she stirred up was on Valentine's Day, when she sent a grand delivery of red roses to Miles' Song's company in a bold move that left him both amused and exasperated. She also takes great delight in introducing Miles' Song to all her colorful friends, proudly declaring, "He's mine." Miles' Song once asked her, "Am I really that good?" Cleo Shu planted a loud kiss on him, stamping her approval on his face. "How could the person I like not be good, if it weren't for seeing Miles' Song again?" Cleo Shu might have nearly forgotten these past memories, suddenly recalling them now: the fireworks they watched together, the auroras they admired, the kisses shared on snowy mountains. She realized not all couples experience such romance in their relationships. Yet in retrospect, she realized that Miles' Song back then wasn't entirely flawless. In her girlish moments, she had once asked Miles' Song, "You're so patient and always know how to make me happy. You must have been quite popular with other girls before, right?" Miles' Song fell uncharacteristically silent, and Cleo Shu immediately seized on it. "Aha. So you have been in a relationship before. What was she like?" Miles' Song sighed helplessly. "My dear, are you digging up the past to hold it against me?" Cleo Shu persisted relentlessly. "Tell me what kind of person she was." Miles' Song hesitated for a moment before saying, "Someone very different from you." Cleo Shu continued to grin playfully. "She was only feigning jealousy for show." "Did you ever coax her the way you coax me?" Miles' Song replied, "No," then added, "Little miss. You know all I did before was study and work, nothing like running around the world with you now." Cleo Shu laughed, climbing onto Miles' Song like a raccoon, and asked him, "Then tell me, do you like me or her more?" Before Miles' Song could even open his mouth, Miss Shu concluded on her own, "No need to guess. I'm so great, you must like me the most." Miles' Song held her and gave a very soft millimeter in response. If Cleo Shu hadn't been carried away by emotions at that time, or if she had been as thoughtful as she is now, she might have realized that even though she and Miles' Song held hands, hugged, and did everything couples should do, but during all those years they were together, Miles' Song never once uttered the word love to her. 2 days later, someone from Miles' Song's company actually reached out to the Shu family. After some back and forth, they finally confirmed the collaboration. The head of the business department told Cleo Shu, "This partner is surprisingly easy to work with, hardly any nitpicking. They're practically a money god." Then, over the next 2 or 3 months, the two companies collaborated several more times. By late summer, when a large-scale order came in, Miles' Song accompanied the team on a business trip to Ning City in person. He arrived late. After the meeting, he went to Cleo Shu's office. No sooner had he sat down than her phone rang. leaving no time for conversation. She walked to the window to answer the call. Nowadays, she spoke to everyone with a warmth that felt like a gentle breeze, as if soothing them. I have been quite busy lately, but once things settle down, I'll definitely make time for you. All right. Miles Song stared at her back, waiting until Cleo Shu hung up the phone, his gaze still fixed on her. When their eyes met, he waited for her to speak first, but Cleo Shu offered no explanation. She had no obligation to explain herself to Miles Song. With a smile, she said, "Sorry, some personal matters delayed our conversation. Let me pour you some tea first." However, a minor mishap occurred while handing over the cup. The handle of the bone china teacup was delicate. As Miles Song reached out to take it, his fingers accidentally brushed against the back of Cleo Shu's hand. She flinched slightly, accidentally spilling some tea. Cleo Shu reacted quickly, immediately setting the cup down and reaching for a tissue on the table. Sorry. Are you burned?" Of course, there was no way it could have burned, just a bit of water that would dry in minutes. But Cleo Shu's exaggerated reaction made Miles Song's expression darken. He grabbed her hand as she tried to wipe away the spill and asked, "Must you be so distant? Really, if it were the old Cleo Shu, forget about serving him tea and water to apologize. Even if he brought food to her, she'd probably find a way to play the victim, saying, 'Oh, I just can't eat anything unless you sweet-talk me into it.'" Cleo Shu pulled her hand away, her words completely contradicting her actions. "How dare I? You're our company's golden patron. How could I be distant?" Miles Song's eyebrow twitched. Then he watched as Cleo Shu walked to the door and firmly closed the half-open gap. When she turned back, she caught him looking at her. This time, she actually offered an explanation. "Force of habit. I'm afraid of being eavesdropped on." Miles Song didn't know that her habit was formed because of him. This was a lesson Cleo Shu learned through him. She would always remember that afternoon when she went to Miles Song's company to find him as the sun was setting. The office door wasn't fully closed. Miles Song stood inside talking to someone. Cleo Shu had intended to leave, but then she heard Miles Song say, "I don't like her." Cleo Shu's footsteps halted, even with her dull sixth sense. She realized the conversation inside was about her. Then a woman's voice was heard from inside the room asking, "Miles, you promised you'd only love me." Cleo Shu had never heard Miles Song answer so firmly, "Of course I only love you. You really don't have feelings for Cleo Shu, do you?" The woman still wanted a definite answer. "Of course not. You know I don't like that type of girl. Didn't you choose Cleo Shu precisely because she's nothing like you?" "I was afraid of seeing your shadow in someone else, afraid of transferring my feelings for you to another. Then I'm back now, Miles. We can be together. Break up with her." Outside the door, Cleo Shu felt her hands and feet turn cold. She heard Miles Song remain silent for a long time before finally saying, "Okay." In just a few minutes, Cleo Shu was jolted out of her love-struck fantasy. Only then did she realize that Miles Song wasn't incapable of love, he just wasn't capable of loving her. She tiptoed away, for the first time losing the courage to push open the door and confront Miles Song, as if she had never been there that day. If given another chance, she would rather choose not to have overheard that conversation that day, and not to have learned the lesson of keeping the office door tightly shut. That woman was named Kala Ji. It was only later that Cleo Shu came to understand that those two words, Kala Ji, represented almost the entirety of Miles Song's youth. As Mr. Shu said, the Song family's waters run deep, and Miles Song's youth was far from easy. Throughout those years of endurance and obscurity, the one who stood by Miles Song's side was always Kala Ji. Later, Kala Ji moved abroad with her family, and at that time, Miles Song was still unknown and powerless to keep her. Yet, they made a mutual promise, vowing that once success and fame were achieved, they would walk side by side. It was only then that Cleo Shu understood the meaning behind Miles Song's words, "You are very different people," and suddenly, she realized just how much Miles Song loved Kala Ji, so much so that he feared falling for someone similar to her while searching for a marriage partner. She stumbled downstairs in a daze, only to collapse in the parking lot, startling the security guard who frantically called an ambulance to rush her to the hospital. When she woke up, the doctor said to her, "Did you know you're pregnant? The fetus isn't very stable." Cleo Shu closed her eyes heavily, unwilling to face the blinding white ceiling in the antiseptic smelling room. I know. After a long silence, tears welled up from the corners of her eyes, soaking the pillow as she said, "Help me schedule the procedure. I won't be keeping the child." The surgery wasn't particularly painful. Before the procedure, she had a phone call with Miles Song and asked what he was up to. Miles Song seemed very busy. Since Kala Ji returned to the country, he hadn't contacted Cleo Shu for several days, almost as if he was avoiding her. Preparing for a meeting, Cleo Shu paused for a moment, then spoke as usual. "Didn't you miss me?" There was silence on Miles Song's end for a few seconds. First, he called her name, his tone carrying an unprecedented hesitation and gravity. "Cleo Shu, what's wrong?" He paused for a few more seconds before saying, "After this busy period is over, I have something to tell you." Cleo Shu said okay, then hung up the phone and entered the operating room. The intravenous anesthetic flowed into her bloodstream, sending her into a deep sleep. No matter how effective the anesthetic is, one must eventually wake up. Just as absurd. False love must one day face the truth. The innocence nurtured in a honeyed jar must also be ruthlessly shattered. Post-surgery, Cleo Shu had no time to dwell on physical pain, nor the chance to grieve over Miles Song any longer. She got out of the hospital bed, even before finishing the required 4-drip, only to hear that one of her company's projects was facing cash flow issues, sending waves of panic throughout the entire staff. Then, after more than half a month, Miles Song asked to meet her. It was at a coffee shop Cleo Shu particularly liked. Miles Song glanced at her somewhat pale face, offered a few words of comfort, and said, "You don't need to worry too much." He gazed at Cleo Shu's face for a long time before finally turning his head away, unwilling to meet her eyes any longer, and spoke the words he had truly come to say, "Cleo Shu, I think we should break up." The breakup seemed almost expected. Upon hearing Miles Song utter the word breakup, Cleo Shu did not react as he had anticipated. She neither accused him nor vented her anger. Nor did she suddenly erupt in sorrow or rage. She was more composed than ever before, taking a small sip of coffee before asking Miles Song softly, "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" In truth, there was so much more she wanted to ask: how he could feign affection for so many years. She also wanted to ask if, even without Kala Ji, he would have been just as resolute once he no longer needed the Shu family's support. And most of all, she wanted to ask if, from beginning to end, she, Cleo Shu, had merely been a stepping stone in his climb to the top. But all the questions ultimately boiled down to just this one. Miles Song lowered his eyes. He had always shown her nothing but gentleness and tolerance, so when he appeared slightly hesitant or guilty, it made Cleo Shu feel an especially sharp pang of sorrow. It made her almost resent her own soft-heartedness, and even more so the lingering love she still held for Miles Song. She even began to see herself as the third party disrupting someone else's relationship, putting Miles Song in a difficult position, and regretted her own relentless pressure. "Sorry, Cleo Shu," Miles Song said. Cleo Shu sensed his resolve and didn't press further about love, instead asking, "Is our company really just facing minor financial issues?" Miles Song didn't expect her to ask this and froze for a moment before replying, "Yes," perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt, he added, "If there's anything you need from me, just say it. I owe you that much." That was the last time they met, and afterward, Cleo Shu had no time to wallow in the sorrow of their 5-year-long false love, nor to heal her battered body and wounded heart, because soon, even worse news arrived. Her father suddenly suffered a stroke under immense pressure, and all the family burdens fell on Cleo Shu and her siblings. Cleo Shu was forced to grow up overnight, abandoning her dreams of carefree adventures and chasing freedom, plunging headfirst into the glitzy world of business. No longer like a proud peacock with its head held high, she began to learn how to humble herself and play along with one client after another. It was merely a case of when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter, but the rivals, watching like tigers eyeing their prey, did not easily let the crumbling Shu family off the hook. Like wolves and tigers, they all tried to take a share when the Shu family was at its most vulnerable. After struggling to hold on for a long time, one day yet another client broke their contract. Seeing that the cash flow was about to collapse, Cleo Shu, utterly exhausted, suddenly thought of Miles' song. She had numbed herself with work for a long time, but in moments of helplessness, she would, absurdly, always think of Miles' song, even after parting ways, even after being deceived. She still clung to the warmth he had once given her, as if guided by some supernatural force. She dialed Miles' song's number, the call connected, and after a long silence, he spoke. "Cleo Shu, what's wrong?" Leaning back in her office chair, Cleo Shu finally asked Miles' song after a long pause. "You once said that if I ever needed help, you'd be there for me. Does that offer still stand?" "Yes," Miles' song replied without hesitation. "Then I need an investment sum," Cleo Shu said. Her voice already weary, Miles' song didn't hesitate much and quickly said okay. If the story had ended there, perhaps someone as open-minded and soft-hearted as Cleo Shu would have cut ties with Miles' song completely, with no debts between them, but that wasn't the case. Later, when Cleo Shu didn't receive the investment funds and called Miles' song again, a woman answered the phone. Perhaps it was a woman's innate sixth sense, but the moment Cleo Shu heard the voice through the receiver, she instantly realized that the person on the other end of the line was Kala Ji. Kala Ji said, "Please do not disturb Miles again. You and he were merely former business partners." Cleo Shu was not one to lose her temper easily. "Miss Ji, would you kindly let Miles' song take the call?" But Kala Ji replied, "Miles has nothing to discuss with you, nor is there any need for him to answer the phone." Before Cleo Shu could speak, she heard Kala Ji ask, "Right, Miles?" Cleo Shu froze. After a long pause, she faintly heard the man on the other end of the line respond with a hum, before the call was abruptly ended. Yet, Cleo Shu remained motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, unable to lower it. A few days later, instead of receiving the promised investment, she was met with Miles' song, who joined forces with her competitors to pressure the Shu family. Together with others, Miles' song blocked the Shu family's clients from signing orders, pushing the already isolated family to the brink of desperation. Before they got together, Miles' song promised to treat Cleo Shu well, but he broke his word. During their relationship, he claimed to be happy with Cleo Shu, though in truth, he felt otherwise. After the breakup, he said he would help Cleo Shu, but in the end, he didn't. Fortunately, Cleo Shu is a warrior who never gives up. Even when Miles' song also pressured the Shu family, she didn't become the camel crushed by the final straw. She ended up relying on no one, with no support to lean on, going door to door to plead her case, facing skeptical investors one after another alone, seizing every opportunity that came her way, and step by step, she managed to make a comeback. How much hardship she endured, how many sleepless nights she spent, how much alcohol she drank, how many tears she shed, those are things not worth mentioning anymore. Miles' song sat in Cleo Shu's office, engaging in a long, superficial conversation about potential collaboration. Cleo Shu carried a professionalism honed by time. When discussing terms with Miles' song, she was like a polished, flawless corporate robot, a far cry from the person she used to be. As we finished discussing work, the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows darkened, and the neon lights reflected off the bustling city streets, creating a somewhat romantic, kaleidoscopic glow. Cleo Shu's words carried a hint of seeing her guest out. Yet Miles' song remained seated in his spot. "Let's have dinner together." Cleo Shu paused for a moment, then slightly raised an eyebrow and asked, "Under what pretext? As part of work, or is this a personal invitation?" Her tone was light, as if she were speaking with just any ordinary client. If it were a personal invitation, Miles' song stared at her intently. Cleo Shu immediately shook her head, smiling as she said, "Then I'm busy, so you're free if it's work-related." Cleo Shu gave him a fleeting glance, and after a brief pause, she smiled again. "It depends. There's a commercial land plot going up for auction soon. Would Mr. Song be interested in collaborating?" Her words carried hidden meanings, and her entire speech was heavily laced with utilitarian motives. Miles' song stared at her intently, feeling that although Cleo Shu was physically close to him now, it was as if a thick fog had settled between them. But he was a businessman who knew how to weigh pros and cons, fully aware of what he truly wanted, so he merely furrowed his brows slightly and asked, "If I agree to consider it, will you have dinner with me?" The meal was at a renowned private kitchen located downstairs from the company. Cleo Shu ate in silence, the small private room filled with only the faint clinking of bowls and chopsticks. After dinner, Miles Song insisted on driving Cleo Shu home, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Perhaps Cleo Shu was tired from a full day of meetings, so she didn't refuse as she had the last time they met. She just hesitated for a moment when getting into the car. She thought that with someone of Miles Song's wealth, even if he wasn't in Ning City, he should have at least 8 or 10 cars in his garage. Yet today, he was driving a somewhat outdated model, a small good luck charm hung from the rearview mirror. And the car freshener on the dashboard was a style popular many years ago, its base ring already yellowed with age. Cleo Shu closed her eyes briefly, and the deliberately forgotten memories suddenly surged back. In an instant, she recalled everything that had happened between her and Miles Song in this car, the laughter-filled drives, the inseparable kisses, the uncontrollable entanglement. Miles Song glanced subtly at Cleo Shu, who clenched her fists tightly. Yet, shortly after the car started moving, she couldn't help but speak. Mr. Song should consider changing cars. Miles Song, however, countered. Why, it's too old, it doesn't suit you. Miles Song remained silent for a long time, yet like Cleo Shu, his words carried hidden meanings, his voice slightly low. I once thought it wasn't suitable, but later realized it was the best. He glanced at Cleo Shu through the rearview mirror, noticing her turn her face away, staring out the window without a word, as if a bitter smile tugged at the corner of her lips, or perhaps there was no expression at all. When getting out of the car, Cleo Shu didn't even bother with polite words. She simply said goodbye, quickly opened the door, and strode off. As if she couldn't bear to stay in the car for even a second longer, Miles Song followed her out immediately, rushing into the elevator behind her and grabbing her forearm in one swift motion. Cleo Shu looked up at him. What do you mean by this, President Song? Miles Song held her hand tightly, not letting go, and said, let's talk. Cleo Shu stared at Miles Song for a long time until the elevator stopped at the floor of her apartment. She seemed on the verge of getting angry, but in the end, she let out a soft, mocking laugh and said word by word, as I mentioned to you some time ago, if it's personal matters, there's nothing left for us to discuss. She tried to pull her hand away but couldn't free it. In the struggle, a small section of her slender, pale arm was revealed, though it wasn't entirely flawless. There was a scar over 10 centimeters long winding along her forearm, an old injury exposed before them both, catching Miles Song's eye and silencing him. Miles Song knew better than anyone how that scar on Cleo Shu's hand came to be. On a winter night during their 3rd year together, while on a business trip to a neighboring city, Miles Song's car was hit by a truck whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. It so happened that Cleo Shu had insisted on coming along that night and was sitting in the passenger seat. Cleo Shu only had minor scratches and was the first to regain composure, quickly jumping out of the car. Meanwhile, Miles Song was dazed from the impact. He likely had fractures, and the car door was severely deformed, making it impossible to open, before they could even call for roadside assistance. Thick smoke began billowing from the front of the car, teetering on the edge of catching fire, yet Cleo Shu ignored the danger and rushed to pry open the door on Miles Song's side. That was the first time Miles Song felt fear. He angrily shouted at Cleo Shu, "Get away from me, don't interfere with my business." As if she couldn't hear him, Cleo Shu, with her hair disheveled, grabbed a tool and began prying open the car door. "Cleo Shu, are you even listening to me anymore?" Miles Song's veins bulged on his face. The snow was heavy, and Cleo Shu was wearing only a thin layer of clothing in the sub-zero outdoor conditions. She was so thin, yet no one knew where she found such tremendous strength at that moment. In the end, she actually managed to pry the car door open and forcibly drag Miles Song out. It took only a minute or two after pulling him out before the car began to self-ignite, eventually burning down to nothing but a metal frame. Miles Song's eyes turned red with emotion. Ignoring the pain of his fractured bones, he abandoned his usual docile obedience toward Cleo Shu and, in a rare outburst of fury, scolded her. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? If the car had caught fire just a second earlier, you could have been killed in the explosion. Are you kidding yourself?" Cleo Shu shook her head repeatedly, utterly exhausted and hoarse, stating bluntly, "No, I can't do it, I can't be without you." Miles Song was instantly speechless. His anger and lingering fear eventually dissolved into a bitter ache. Before the ambulance arrived, he pulled Cleo Shu into his arms. Miles Song held her tightly, his arms like steel bands, gripping her fiercely as if he wanted to press her into his very bones and blood. Even Miles Song didn't realize there were wet tears on his own face. "Are you an idiot?" Cleo Shu instead laughed and said, "Not at all, I think it's worth it. Doesn't this count as sharing life and death?" It wasn't until they got into the ambulance, under the bright lights, that they noticed Cleo Shu had a long gash on her forearm from the metal sheet. The wound was deep and ultimately required 20 stitches. She didn't cry out in pain at all. Instead, she proudly pointed at the stitched wound and said to Miles Song, "Look, this is the mark of a love warrior." Miles Song found it both amusing and exasperating, yet also somewhat angry. "A mark? This is a lesson from your recklessness. Didn't the doctor say you'd need cosmetic surgery later to fix it?" "No fixing," she declared. "Once the stitches are out, I'm getting your name and mine tattooed over it, linking us together." After the car accident, Miles Song got a new car, while Cleo Shu, an atheist, even went to get a protective charm for safe travels. Cleo Shu is a woman of her word. Whatever she says she'll do, she does. Yet in the end, she never got around to getting that tattoo, and for some reason, she never fixed that ugly scar either. That scar was proof they had once been together, but now it lay between Miles Song and Cleo Shu, sharply dividing the past from the present. Their gazes lingered on it simultaneously, but in that brief moment, Miles Song felt a pain from his chest to his eyes, leaving him momentarily dazed. Cleo Shu let out a faint HMPH, withdrew her hand, and turned to leave. Miles Song reacted instantly, swiftly grabbing her shoulder again. Pain flickered in his eyes. "Don't go, Cleo Shu, don't go." Cleo Shu looked up, staring at him coldly for a long moment before asking, "Miles Song, what exactly do you want?" He knew his wish was utterly unrealistic, but he also knew that if he didn't speak now, he might never get another chance. "Can we start over?" Cleo Shu fell completely silent, her expression one of disbelief. "What are you saying?" Before Miles Song could respond, her tone shifted to something self-deprecating and mocking. "Don't joke like that. I gave up on things like love years ago." Miles Song refused to let her go. Now, even getting close to her felt like a luxury. "I'm not joking, Cleo. What will it take for you to forgive me?" "I'll do anything." Cleo Shu stared straight at him, her face devoid of even the polite smile from earlier, leaving only icy clarity in her eyes. "Miles Song, don't say things like that. You know your words have long lost any credibility with me." Perhaps it was the heavy night dew, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted, but for once, she didn't seem like a flawless robot. Her emotions surfaced, letting him see that she, too, was in pain. "I once asked you if you could stay." Miles Song was left speechless and was finally pushed away by her with force. Cleo Shu strode forward, not allowing Miles Song to follow. Standing behind her at a distance of a few meters, Miles Song suddenly asked, "How can I make it up to you? Win that land bid and complete that project? Can you give me a chance?" Cleo Shu abruptly stopped in her tracks, pausing where she stood. After a long silence, she said, "Perhaps." When the land auction began, Miles Song and Cleo Shu were seated next to each other. The auctioneer announced the starting price, but Miles Song didn't rush to raise his paddle. Instead, he asked Cleo Shu, "If I win the bid, will you forgive me a little?" Cleo Shu remained silent, and Miles Song didn't press further. He raised the bid and joined the auction. The prices kept climbing higher, and gradually even those who had initially joined in for the excitement stopped participating, leaving only 2 or 3 genuinely interested bidders raising their paddles in turn. Miles Song was resolute, and by the end, only one bidder remained competing against him. The other party seemed confident about securing the land, matching Miles Song's bids no matter how high he went. The opposing bidder offered an exorbitant price, prompting the auctioneer on stage to ask, "950 million flat. Mr. Song, do you wish to raise your bid?" Miles Song wasn't in a hurry. He turned his head to look at Cleo Shu, seeking her opinion with his gaze. Cleo Shu didn't look at him, merely reminding him calmly, if we bid any higher, the profit margin will be very slim. 950 million yuan, going once, the auctioneer called out. So what do you think? You still want me to win the bid, don't you? Cleo Shu didn't look at him. After 2 seconds of silence, she hesitated slightly before saying yes. 950 million, going twice. Miles Song looked at Cleo Shu. After all these years, sitting beside her, he could still hear the beating of his own heart in his chest. He recalled how, years ago, Kala Ji had asked him word by word, "Do you feel guilty towards her? Or have you already fallen for her?" He retorted quickly at that moment, "I didn't." Clearly, there was an element of Kala Ji's instigation in his relationship with Cleo Shu, but in the end, Kala Ji began to feel the unease of potential loss. She threw his phone to the ground. "Then prove it to me. If you don't like her, you shouldn't be soft on her. You should take a share of the Shu family's profits." Miles Song looked at the hysterical Kala Ji and finally agreed. He began to suppress the Shu family, also profiting from it. It wasn't that he hadn't heard about Cleo Shu running around to raise money, but he still took harsh measures, trying to prove that he truly didn't like Cleo Shu. He didn't know whether he was doing this to convince Kala Ji or to convince himself. Even when he and Kala Ji broke up, and Kala Ji shattered fragments everywhere, saying, "I think you do have feelings for her in your heart," he firmly retorted, "No, impossible." He refused to believe that he had truly fallen for his own act in a lie, nor dared he admit that he had genuinely developed feelings for Cleo Shu. It was only later, when a business partner suddenly remarked to him, that Cleo Shu from Ning City is quite the formidable one. Despite being seriously ill recently, she still managed to secure several major deals. His heart trembled at the words, and after many sleepless nights, he couldn't resist the urge to check on her. Using some less than honorable means, he obtained Cleo Shu's medical records. While reviewing her recent gastrointestinal examination, he also discovered that years ago, she had undergone an abortion procedure. Miles Song rarely experienced intense emotions, but this feeling was something he never wanted to go through again, like a delayed pain suddenly striking him, making those few lines of medical records seem utterly incomprehensible. He kept looking at that date over and over. It was 2 weeks before he and Cleo Shu broke up. He hesitated for a long time until a client asked if he wanted to visit Ning City, finally giving him an excuse to return. He could no longer deceive himself and had to admit that he had long fallen in love with Cleo Shu. Miles Song raised his paddle before the auctioneer called the third price. With a calm expression, he smiled and said, "Cleo, I won't lie to you again. If you want it, anything is yours." Cleo Shu froze for a moment, feeling that these words were eerily familiar. Back when he used to coax her, he often said the same thing. She finally met his gaze, her expression complex, whether it was joy or sorrow, she couldn't tell. "Mr. Song bids 1 billion, any higher offers." The price had already exceeded everyone's expectations, and the unknown bidder finally backed down. No longer engaging in a bidding war with Miles Song, the land deal wasn't a complete loss. But the profit margin was just too slim. Shortly after the auction, just as the funds were fully paid and plans for the next steps were being finalized, Miles Song's company was reported for tax issues. Under normal circumstances, this would be considered minor. Businesses often employ various tax avoidance strategies, and such practices are commonplace. It was just at a time when cash flow was tight, which left Miles Song somewhat stretched thin, and negative news gradually began to circulate outside. Before long, the issue of the company's tax involvement was officially filed, and Miles Song was summoned by the public security authorities several times, each stay at the police station lasting longer than the last. Cleo Shu didn't reach out to him proactively, but one evening, Miles Song called Cleo Shu to ask how she had been lately. "I'm naturally doing fine as usual, but President Song, you still have the mind to care about me at a time like this." Miles Song's tone was unexpectedly light, without the despondency of being mired in public opinion. He simply responded with an millimeter and fell silent, leaving only the faint sound of their breathing over the phone until, after a long while, the call ended, before he was once again summoned to the police station. A company executive briefed him on the recent negative publicity and financial pressures, mentioning that morale was unstable and some shareholders had grown pessimistic, already beginning to sell their stakes. Miles Song suddenly interrupted his subordinate, asking, "Is anyone buying?" The subordinate paused for a moment. "The buyers aren't well-known companies." Before there was time to inquire further, Miles Song was once again summoned by judicial authorities. This time, his stay at the bureau was unusually long, and the public opinion outside grew even more intense. Some even began to spread rumors that he had already been arrested, causing the value of the company's shares to plummet. Some business partners also started refusing to renew their contracts. On the eve of the tax case being filed and awaiting trial, Miles Song had already been in and out of the police station 4 times. Several of his subordinates grew anxious as they watched shareholders continuously sell off their stakes, yet Miles Song himself remained as steady as a mountain, saying, "Victory and defeat are common in war." On the eve of the trial, Miles Song suddenly felt inspired one night and drove to a mountaintop in the suburbs. It was an overcast day that day, and even without much artificial light at the mountaintop at night, the stars remained barely visible. He lingered at the summit for a long time until the night dew seeped into his clothes, making them slightly damp. Just as he was about to leave, headlights suddenly illuminated the scene. The headlights spilled over Miles Song, casting a long shadow. Perhaps the driver was startled too, slamming on the brakes abruptly, the tires screeching sharply in the silence. In the darkness, Cleo Shu stepped out of the car. From a distance of a few meters, she asked, "Why are you here?" Miles Song quietly looked at her, as if through this moment, he could glimpse the past when he had confessed his feelings to Cleo Shu here many years ago. "The trial is in a couple of days. I wanted to come here and take a look. What's there worth seeing?" Miles Song didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "What about you? Why did you come?" Cleo Shu glanced up at him. "For me, this is where a colossal lie began. I constantly remind myself never to forget." Miles Song fell silent. Cleo Shu initially tried to suppress her emotions, but after a moment, as if particularly resentful of Miles Song standing there at that very moment, she couldn't help but lash out sarcastically. "Why did you come here? The trial is about to begin, and yet you still have the nerve for this." The crisis Miles Song faces today bears many similarities to the Shu family's predicament back then, as both are mired in financial peril. Yet, Miles Song is not as desperate as Cleo Shu was in those days. He smiled and asked Cleo Shu, "Isn't this exactly what you wanted to see?" It was as if he had shed all his shackles, feeling utterly unburdened. "Cleo Shu, haven't you been waiting for this day since we started working together?" Cleo Shu's expression froze, her face blank for several seconds. After a long while, her tone was no longer sarcastic, just puzzled. "You knew from the start." Miles Song smiled indifferently and said, "I told you, I didn't lie, as long as you like it. Anything is possible." Why? Cleo Shu couldn't understand why someone like him, who would stop at nothing, would suddenly choose to jump into the fire pit on his own. Miles Song gazed at the endless dark clouds in the sky above the mountaintop. "When I first came here with you, I had almost nothing. Every beginning of what I possess is connected to you. Later, I obtained what I desired, only to realize that I had been wrong from the very start. I often think, if only I could return to the past. That would be wonderful." Cleo Shu uttered 3 words, "Impossible." Miles Song seemed determined to pour out everything he wanted to say at that moment. "Back then, you didn't tell me we had a child. Cleo Shu, all these years, the thought of you lying in that operating room has been unbearable for me." Regret, remorse, and agony were unmistakably written across Miles Song's face. Cleo Shu stared straight at him, took a deep breath to steady herself, and said, "Actually, it wasn't that painful." She spoke as if it were just a trivial matter. It wasn't fully formed yet, not a life. Once the anesthesia kicked in, I didn't feel a thing. It was just like cutting out a piece of flesh from my body, no different from removing an appendix. It wasn't much blood anyway. The removed tissue was discarded as medical waste, no one ever saw it. She paused, her voice soft but her gaze fixed intently on Miles Song. "Even if we could really go back in time, even if I had told you, would it have made any difference? Would we have kept it in the end?" Miles Song wanted to say yes, but Cleo Shu seemed lost in memories as she recalled the past. We were so young back then. When I first found out about it, I panicked, but after thinking it over, I thought maybe it could be good news, maybe you'd be happy too. But just as I was excited to tell you, I realized our relationship was nothing but a joke. She once asked Miles Song in despair why he had to suppress the Shu family. At that time, Miles Song said, "I've already wronged you. I can't wrong Kala Ji again." She also asked Miles Song if he had ever truly loved her. After a long hesitation, Miles Song finally said no. "Miles Song, everything can never go back to the way it was. From the moment you stood on this mountaintop and lied to me, saying you loved me, it was destined that we would become adversaries. The past you long for is the history I despise the most." Miles Song looked at her and suddenly sighed softly. "The harm is already done, Cleo. If punishing me could make you feel better, then I'm willing to lose everything. After all, everything I have came from you." There was pain in Cleo Shu's eyes. She remained silent in the night breeze for a long time before finally driving down the mountain late at night. With Miles Song following behind her, quiet as a wordless follower, as the car entered the city, rain finally began to fall, and the urban expressway was nearly empty in the early hours of the morning. Cleo Shu was deeply unsettled, driving at a considerable speed. She was suddenly blinded by glaring headlights at a turn. Instinctively, she swerved the steering wheel, only to hear a loud crash. When she regained her composure, her car had collided with the roadside flower bed. With another vehicle now wedged between hers and the truck, the same person, the same memories, the same scene replaying, Cleo Shu reacted almost reflexively, frantically calling for help before rushing in a panic to open Miles Song's car door. The heavy rain drenched her completely, her fingers trembling as she cried out, "Miles Song." Just as she was about to pull open the car door, a warm palm clasped her hand, reassuring her, "I'm okay." Perhaps the protective charm in the car had worked its magic, though the passenger seat was crushed beyond recognition. Miles Song emerged largely unharmed. Cleo Shu stood frozen in place, her heart pounding wildly, while Miles Song held her hand, repeating over and over, "Don't be afraid, Cleo Shu, I'm all right." In the heavy rain, Cleo Shu looked rather disheveled, finally snapping back to reality. She cursed at him without a care for her image. "Are you fucking insane, out of your mind?" Using your own car to block it, Miles Song got out of the car to comfort her, but she shoved him away violently. Perhaps she used too much force, or maybe it was the lingering fear. She ended up stumbling and falling to the ground herself. Miles Song's eyes turned red, as if he had finally touched the real Cleo Shu. He, too, threw caution to the wind, half kneeling on the ground, pulling her into his arms and holding her tightly. "You're afraid something might happen to me, aren't you? You still care about me." Exhausted, Cleo Shu let him hold her as tears suddenly streamed down her face. The salty tears mixed with the rain as she leaned slightly against Miles Song's shoulder, drawing a small measure of security from him. But in the end, she still struggled to her feet and left, rarely showing such vulnerability and pain in front of Miles Song. Perhaps it's not about caring, just a habit. Liking is instinct, but hatred is a habit. Miles Song. We can't erase those unbearable parts of the past. Broken mirrors can't be mended, and no matter how much you try to cover up a scar, it still exists. I hate you too much, and that makes me suffer too deeply. Her hatred grew from love, thus becoming a sharp blade that wounded Miles Song and herself alike. The lawyer hired by Miles Song was highly professional. After 2 rounds of court hearings, the final outcome was merely a fine, far from landing him behind bars. Those who had been anxiously worrying for Miles Song breathed a sigh of relief. One subordinate remarked with emotion, "We were really lucky this time. It's also fortunate that the companies involved in the equity acquisition haven't engaged in malicious dumping recently, allowing us to weather this period." Miles Song seemed lost in thought. When he went to see Cleo Shu, she refused to meet him, only answering his phone call. On the phone, he asked, Why the sudden change of heart?" Cleo Shu didn't give a straightforward answer but instead asked him, "Actually, there's a question I have. I think I already know the answer, but I want to hear the truth from you. I once asked you if you ever truly liked me. And you said no, that's not it, I just wasn't willing to admit it at the time. Cleo Shu asked again. Then have you ever regretted it? Of course I have, many times. She suddenly seemed somewhat relieved. That car of yours. I heard from the repair shop that it was too severely damaged and is beyond repair, but that car was already too old anyway. It was time to scrap it. She paused. That might be for the best. Actually, Ning City isn't very livable, the air quality isn't great, and your main business isn't even here. You shouldn't stay here all the time. Cleo Shu, what do you mean? It means we shouldn't see each other anymore. No, it's obvious we still like each other. It's obvious you still can't bring yourself to finish me off. Cleo Shu sighed softly. I just don't want to be stuck in the same place anymore. Suddenly, I don't want to be trapped in hatred, ending up like you and Kalaji, exhausting all efforts in scheming. In truth, both you and I are losers. I don't want to look back on these things years from now and feel the same guilt and regret as you do. Miles Song, I think it's time for me to start a new life. Miles Song looked up at the towering skyscrapers, once believing he could still be very close to Cleo Shu, only to realize in the end that they were forever separated by an insurmountable height. At this moment, he finally understood, helplessly, that perhaps Cleo Shu would find new love, would pour her affection into someone new. Only that person could never be him again. All he could do was stay away from her life, never see her, never speak a word to her. Never let her remember him, so that she could gradually forget those blood-stained memories of love and hatred from the past. Miles Song, let the past be the past. I no longer hold any grudge against you. The phone call ended, and the bustling streets were filled with an endless stream of vehicles. While crowds of people came and went on the busy roads, in the end, he was the only one left, stuck in place.